Roche, you may proceed.
Okay, thank you, Pamela. A very good morning to all our esteemed guests. Firstly, I must sincerely apologize for the slight delay. As you know, on virtual platforms, sometimes you do get dismantled on these platforms. So once again, my sincerest apologies. But in saying that, I still wish to warmly welcome you to this webinar, which is going to unpack fulfilling a fundamental human right. It's about the myths and the stigmas associated with albinism. But before we go into the program, I want to acknowledge our sincerest and heartfelt thanks to staff and students at UKZN, the higher education institutions locally and nationally that are in attendance, government institutions, NGOs, and all other distinguished guests. Once again, thank you so much. My name is Dr. Rosh Subrayan. I'm the disability coordinator in the disability unit based at the School of Education. I'm also a disability scholar and with very much interest and in-depth um, and to understand disability in the space of higher education. So before we go into the program once again, and before I actually introduce our esteemed panelists, I want to take this opportunity of just informing you that this is part and parcel of the Disability Unit's webinar seminar series. Thus far, our disability webinar series have addressed stigma in the space of disability in academic spaces, assistive devices and how it produces stigma, physical disabilities, and stigma orientations attached to that. We have also done stigma webinar series on substance abuse, mental health challenges, and HIV and AIDS. So, but today we're moving a step further to commemorate Albinism Month, which was September, and I know now it's October, but nevertheless, the University of KwaZulu-Natal wishes to place on record their stance on commemorating Albinism Month. So, in that commemorations, our disability units have provided staff development platforms to unpack and understand the experiences or the psychosocial challenges experienced by persons living with the albinism condition. We have many students with albinism conditions here, and we needed to conscientize and educate and develop ourselves with knowledge of how these students negotiate and navigate the higher education terrain. Further to that, further commemoration lay in the fact that lectures were done with life science students in the Bachelor of Education program of the experiences of persons with an albinism condition. Last week, a colleague and I presented an academic paper at the International Albinism Beyond 2030 conference. And today we are here with the seminar series interrogating issues relevant to myths and stigmas associated with stigma. Before we go into the panels, ladies and gentlemen, I think it must be incumbent upon me to just mention a few global, national, and South African policy frameworks, all with relevance to persons living with an albinism condition. If we go to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, of which South Africa is a signatory to, and more specifically, Article 15 speaks about freedom from torture or inhumane and degrading treatment, punishment, and that nobody shall be subjected to torture or degrading treatment or punishment. Further to that, still in the convention or on the convention is Article 16, in that it draws our attention to freedom from exploitation, violence, and abuse, and freedom from being subjected to torture, cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment. So that's as far as the global human rights disability instrument is concerned. And then when we come to Africa, we look at the much spoken about now African Disability Protocol. This protocol, it actually ensures that nobody shall be truly left behind. And it aligns itself well with the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, which screams out or drums into our voices that nobody shall be left behind. But coming back to the African Disability Protocol, it is unique to the continent of Africa. And it takes into consideration African practices, concerns, customs, so that the lives of people with disabilities in Africa can improve. In addition to that, it tackles ingrained issues of disability discrimination, health equity, social equity, educational equity, and employment without any form of stigma, discrimination, marginalization, and oppression. But more specifically, this African Disability Protocol, it encompasses, as I said before, issues relevant to traditional beliefs, harmful practices, the role of the family, caregivers, and the community in supporting and reconstructing the human development of persons with disabilities in Africa. But more specifically, within this protocol, it speaks about the disability minority community, which is albinism. Okay? But coming back to the UNCRPD, from my reading, I've realized that as much as the convention is a global human rights instrument, it's comprehensive on human rights, but it does not address the unique challenges experienced by persons with albinism as the African Disability Protocol. In addition to that, in Africa, there is a protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa. More specifically, if we look at Article 11 in this African Charter, we will note issues relevant to harmful practices, whereby state parties must be held accountable to offer appropriate support and assistance to anybody facing harmful practices. This includes legal sanctions and any other harmful practices perpetuated against persons with disabilities. But more specifically, in this African Charter, it speaks about witchcraft, abandonment, concealment, ritual killings, um, uh, directly focus on persons with organisms. Encourage these harmful practices and move on to the expansion of capabilities of persons with disabilities. Now, very quickly, if we come to South Africa, South Africa has domesticated the South African Disability Protocol, which is the white paper on the rights of persons with disabilities 2015. Here too, this white paper again speaks about harmful cultural practices, stigma, harmful traditional beliefs, such as albinism, hate speech, ostracization, othering, human trafficking, and even murder. Just one more framework. If we look at the strategic disability policy framework for the post-school education and training sector, it may have been a good idea to see some visibility of the unique experiences and the unique support services that needed to be provided for persons with albinism. Tying into that, my colleague, Dr. Ashley, and I, we presented at an international conference last week, which provided the audience with such rich and in-depth um, information and knowledge on what is going on with albinism, support services, harmful practices, stigma, bullying, and everything. And some of the issues that was raised very carefully at this conference, and it must be incumbent upon me to mention these things, is with regard to violations, stigma, bullying, depression, marginalization, more specifically, the issue of skin cancers and how governments have failed in their responsibilities to provide proper support with regard to screening for skin cancer, health inequities, um, the lived experiences, hate crimes, discrimination, violence, and specifically on mental health challenges experienced by persons living with an albinism um, condition. Very good presentations were on climate justice, but I don't want to speak too much about it as panelists will be passing on that. So now the floor is open and we will move on to our panel discussion. We will first have Dr. Ashley Subia. We'll go on to Dr. Nakabunga Bashle, and lastly, Ms. Manamang Sebotsane. So a little background on Dr. Uh, Dr. Ashley Subia is Dr. Subia is the manager he manages services at the South African National Council for the Blind, um, more so in the space of assistive technology. And he leads initiatives to enhance access to assistive technologies for persons with visual disabilities throughout Africa. Further to that, Dr. Ashley comes from a very strong academic background in digital accessibility and disability support. He holds a PhD in biology from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. However, his academic journey was very deeply intertwined with his lived experience of vision loss due to congenital glaucoma. So at a very young age, he lost his sight completely. But if you know Dr. Ashley very well, he doesn't work on limitations. He works on progress, development, nurturing the spirit of persons with disabilities. Now I hand you over Dr. Ashley Subia. He will provide us a presentation on a desktop study of the digital accessibility experiences of learners with the albinism condition in the South African basic education system. Ashley, may I hand this over to you now? Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. It's lovely to be back with the colleagues at UKZN. Dr. Roche, can I just check, is the PowerPoint sharing?
Not as yet. Oh, it's coming on, Ashley. Yeah,
Okay,
there you go, Ashley.
perfect.
Yeah.
So, as Dr. Subrian mentioned, this study was a collaborative effort between herself and myself at the South African National Council for the Blind. And really, it was inspired by us, looking at broader research to inform evidence-based advocacy and digital transformation in the education system. If we can move to slide 2, the introduction. So, albinism globally and within Africa continues to be framed by myths stigma, and misunderstanding. Across communities, harmful beliefs such as associating albinism with supernatural power or curses has translated into tangible health, social, and educational inequalities. For learners with albinism, this manifests in multiple ways. In particular, systemic neglect in our basic education system. While our policy landscape in South Africa offers robust policy protection, a clear implementation gap remains, particularly where digital learning is concerned. Digital technology, which is something I'm very passionate about, offers a huge potential for inclusion, but also can reproduce high levels of exclusion. And it was this paradox that formed the basis for this collaborative study. The next slide. The study is grounded in two interconnected theoretical frameworks. The first is the obvious one, the models of disability, contrasting the medical model, which locates the disability within an individual, with the social model, which emphasizes the barriers in the environment and attitudes. We allowed to create a distinction which afforded us the opportunity to shift the analytical lens from the impairment itself to the systems and structures that create exclusion. The second framework was the psychosocial lens of stigma, in which we identify 4 interrelated forms of stigma: public stigma, self-stigma, stigma by association, and institutional stigma. Together, these lenses illuminate how learners with albinism experience exclusion, not only physically through inaccessible technologies or environments, but also psychologically through internalized and systemic forms of stigma. The next slide. South Africa's policy environment is theoretically very enabling, as Dr. Subrayan indicated in the opening address. The UNCRPD enshrines equality, participation, and dignity. The African Disability Protocol extends these commitments by specifically addressing harmful cultural practices and the marginalization of minority disability groups, including persons with albinism. Yet the evidence reveals that policy intent has not translated into psychosocial inclusion. Learners with albinism continue to face bullying, ridicule, and teacher bias, fears of ritual killings and abduction, particularly in rural communities, limits physical mobility and attendance. Furthermore, racialized perceptions of albinism, in other words, being viewed as white within a predominantly Black community, deepens identity struggles and alienation. And these realities shape how learners engage or fail to engage with digital learning. And stigma and fear does not remain within the community. It permeates into the classroom and by extension, the digital environment. The next slide. In this study, digital accessibility referred to the equal usability of digital tools and learning materials for all learners, regardless of disability. 3 dimensions are key in evaluating digital accessibility. Content must be readable, systems must be navigable, and accessibility must be inclusive by design. In practice, this means ensuring that learners with albinism can access visual media, smartboard content, and digital assessments effectively. However, many schools lack the technology, infrastructure, and teacher readiness to achieve this. Digital accessibility is often seen as optional rather than essential. The next slide. There were two key questions that needed to be addressed by the study. What challenges do learners with albinism face in accessing digital information? And why do these challenges persist despite inclusive education policy? While the focus was on South Africa, comparative evidence from regions in Namibia revealed similar challenges and trends. Ultimately, the digital divide mirrors broader systemic inequalities shaped by socio-economic disparities, uneven resourcing, and historical exclusion. The next slide. We employed a systematic desktop review, an approach well suited to mapping existing knowledge and identifying gaps. Reviewing literature from 2001 to 2025. And 2001 is significant because it was when the White Paper 6 on inclusive education emerged. We drew from academic databases alongside grey literature from government departments, the NGO sector, and advocacy organizations. The process followed 5 structured steps, from defining the research scope and conducting in-depth searches to extracting data and appraising the quality. We used 2 appraisal tools, the CASP checklist to appraise credibility of academic literature and methodological quality, and the OCODS checklist to evaluate grey literature, specifically looking at the authority, accuracy, coverage, objectivity, date, and significance of the documentation. Finally, we synthesized the findings against frameworks such as the UNCRPD, the White Paper 6, SDG 4, and the African Disability Protocol, allowing for triangulation across policy, practice, and lived experience. The next slide. 4 consistent psychosocial themes emerged during the study. First, persistent myths and superstitions continue to shape negative attitudes towards persons with albinism. Secondly, stigma and discrimination remains highly prevalent, manifesting through bullying, isolation, and name-calling. And thirdly, structural exclusion compounds these experiences, with unsafe transport routes, fear of abduction, and poor community support reducing the attendance of learners. Finally, teacher and community awareness remains very limited, meaning that stigma often goes unchallenged. And these dynamics create a hostile learning environment where learners must continually navigate belonging, self-worth, and safety, and challenges that extend into digital participation. The next slide. On the digital front, 3 core findings emerge. Firstly, that learning environments are highly inaccessible. Digital platforms often possess small fonts, poor contrast, and unadjustable visual elements. Secondly, there's a lack of assistive technology integration, with few schools providing either manual or electronic magnifiers, screen readers, or training for educators in how to use these technologies. Where devices exist, they are frequently underutilized due to a lack of knowledge or maintenance. Finally, digital literacy and connectivity gaps remain highly prevalent. High data costs, power interruptions, and unreliable connectivity further entrench inequality, particularly in rural and under-resourced schools. Together, all of these challenges expose a policy practice disconnect where the promise of inclusion remains a rhetorical concept. The next slide. So at a policy and system level, several actions are critical. Firstly, we need to develop a national digital accessibility framework aligned with the UNCRPD. We need to ensure that accessibility by design principles are integrated in all educational technology resourcing, and teacher capacity building is essential, especially in low vision accessibility and assistive technology use. Digital infrastructure needs to be strengthened, particularly in rural and township schools. And what we need to do is also promote user-led design. So persons with albinism need to be at the forefront of development of digital tools. The next slide. At the psychosocial and educational level, school-based counseling and peer support networks need to be expanded. Reasonable accommodations, such as large print materials and reduced glare environments, must be provisioned. Awareness programs to challenge stereotypes and discriminatory language must be implemented. And we need to prioritize fostering an inclusive schooling environment where safety and belonging is of the utmost priority. And we can do this by supporting empowerment and advocacy initiatives led by persons with albinism. In conclusion, digital accessibility is not merely a technical or an infrastructural issue. It is fundamentally a human rights imperative. Real inclusion will depend on the ability to close the persistent gap between progressive policy and everyday experiences, ensuring that every learner with albinism can participate fully, safely, and with dignity in the digital age. The final slide is just a list of references that provided the empirical and normative foundation for the study, which, and we will make a full list of references available upon completion of the publication. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Subia, for the presentation on academic literature for your desktop study. And as you so rightfully mentioned, what the literature is revealing that in spite of all the transformative, inclusive and human rights policy instruments, complexities and tensions for persons with disabilities still exist. Why is it so? If we have the promises in these transformative policies, and I hope that this desktop study will seek to further understand that, and where we can have the provision of some kind of recommendations to enhance human rights and full human development for persons with disabilities. Um, and, I must agree with you, and I'm almost certain that many persons will agree with you when you state that digital accessibility, or may I add on, digital equity, is a human rights and social justice imperative. And thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Ashley Subriya. We wish you well with the South African National Council for the Blind, and furthering your academic endeavors in the field of albinism. Thank you very much. Okay, so now, before we go any further, I must extend very warm welcome. We have a guest from Ghana. He's the advocacy manager from the African Albinism Network, Kwame Andrew Daklo. A very warm welcome to you, and we're so pleased to have you as our guest at this webinar series hosted by the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you so much. So next, I want to present to you Dr. Nakubunga Bashle Sabela. Dr. Sabela is our very own. She is a medical intern by profession. She matriculated at Velange High School, and she obtained a medical degree at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And I see from a picture, she has a very robust and exciting smile. Today, she is going to speak to us or enlighten us on her lived experience of how albinism, how students with albinism can be reasonably accommodated in the academic spaces. And we are very glad to have Dr. Sabela presenting on this because one of the greatest visions and goals of the University of KwaZulu-Natal is about putting retention measures in place as a part of student development so that we can ensure student success. So I think your presentation comes at a very apt moment. Thank you so much, Dr. Sabela. I'm going to hand you over to do your presentation.
Good day, everyone. Thank you. I have an issue with my video, so I tried. So I'm going to be speaking very briefly on so I'll start from the beginning. So much as it has been stated, I am going to be speaking on how people with albinism can be catered for in the academic space. I'll share just briefly on my lived experiences as a student at UKZN. So this is going to be the outline. I'll just be speaking on stigma and myths, bullying, the impact in the experiences I've had, impact it had on my academic journey, and just really to speak on how or what can be done. So that's the now what. So I think when it comes to being a person living with a person with albinism, it's complex because in some places it's not regarded as a disability, and in some places it is regarded as a disability. And I think there's a bit of confusion mostly regarding that, because then when it is now put in light that, oh, hey, people with albinism actually have a disability, and it may differ. Maybe others, it's more of the visual impairment more than the skin problem, because also there are different classes of it. But I think for most parts, I remember when I had initially enrolled in medical school, I was under the impression mostly that certain qualifications people with albinism cannot do. Mostly based on the limitations that they may have or experience. And also there were issues around, just because I'm a person with albinism, there are certain things that I can't do. I think when I got into med school and I was informed that I was the first person at UKZN, as old as UKZN medical school is, I was the first person they had accepted who has albinism. And so it was a journey and a half between me and the institution and the disability unit in terms of how can they correctly accommodate. I don't want to use the word accommodate, but also, for lack of a better word, I'll use that, to ensure that my needs are catered for. So to take just a brief example, um, the first speaker, he spoke about uh, assistive devices, the use of technology, and to help people living with albinism to be able to live better, or to be able to have, them having that access to that kind of support would help them in their academic journey, and also to navigate even in the workspaces. Coming to the difficult part, the bullying part. I think mostly from my lived experience is that the bullying is mostly associated with fear and poor understanding and knowledge from the person that is, bullying you. Growing up, I didn't really experience a lot of bullying when I was growing up, but I think I started getting a lot of backlash and a bit of bullying when I was in the university spaces, because remember, university is a highly competitive space, and there's really a lot that like you meet. That's where you actually meet people of different diversity, different cultures, different home circumstances. And so I think then that's when I started having to, or experiencing just a little bit of bullying in an instance, like for example, where if I'm doing something and I'm excelling in it, it would be a thing of, oh, she's doing it well of because she has albinism. Or if there's something that's good that I'm doing, or something that I'm doing well, it is always associated with the disability. And sometimes it really does take away from the efforts that as a person you have put in, and is now attached to the disability. And I felt like it was really not the best of experiences, but also, as I've stated, that it is mostly associated with poor knowledge and understanding, and also a form, like, used as a form of intimidation as well. And also just kind of, it really is like sometimes is a projection of how that person lacks the understanding, how that person lacks, and or is intimidated by, the confidence, or that the way that you may come off to them. Because to be fair, and if you're being honest, people with albinism are really gifted. I've never met a single person who is living with albinism that is not gifted in their own way, form, and shape. We tend to be very confident people. We don't shy away from how speaking out about how we feel and advocating for ourselves for most parts where necessary. And so sometimes it really does sometimes come off as something that can be it can be very kind of intimidating to others, and then it in turn becomes a cycle of bullying. It's getting to the crux of things. So now I will be speaking just a little bit on effects on my academic journey. So in primary and high school, I went to mainstream schools. Not like my entire high school and primary, I went to mainstream schools. I didn't go to a special school. And upon starting my varsity learning, there was just a lot that I went to a school that was from the rural areas. We didn't have any technological devices that we had access to. I didn't know anything about computers. And so the transition for me from that space to getting into varsity was really a big gap. It really affected me a lot, especially in terms of how I was performing academically. Because, for example, it was my first time being in a lecture hall, for example, and now I'm sitting in front, but I also can't see what is being projected in the lecture hall. I'm scared. I can't even ask if there's something that I can't see. The change in learning environments and how I had to learn to adjust quickly and cope. Because remember, even in as much as you can have Ubahle who is coming from Velangai High School move or transition into medical school, and have a person who's normal and doesn't have a disability and get into medical school. For them, adjustments, yes, it may take time, but remember, for them, there isn't so much limitations as it would be for me, who now has to first, before even coming to understanding the information or all this academic work that I need to understand, there's also an issue of understanding myself and also understanding how I can fit into this program and how I can be able to better, have good access to all the academic tools that are made available for me. So that is when I think I'm just going to, for the interest of time, I'm going to speak on how, on one effect, and then I'm going to speak on how, on the what now. So the solutions or the proposed things that I felt really helped me in terms of assisting me with that challenge that I may have been facing. So, for example, in terms of my academic performance, people with albinism, I'll speak for myself specifically, I have a problem with my visual impairment. I have a problem with mostly the accommodation of the eye because of the severity of the nystagmus that I have. What happens is the changes in lighting, changes in fonts that I'm reading on, and as well as the changes in color, they tend to affect my visual accommodation a lot. So, for example, I can't be, if I look at something that is of a small font and then large, small and large, small and large, it kind of tires my eyes quickly, or the muscles of my eye, they tend to get tired more quickly than they would have, because then I would be squinting, I would be trying to, force the eye to stay accommodated or focus on whatever that I'm reading at that particular time. So in spaces like lecture halls where the slides are moving fast, the lecturer is speaking, and I still need to see what is being projected and still have to listen to what is being said, it really became a big challenge for me to be able to grasp into the work that is being taught and sort of gain a good understanding of the work that is being taught. But at some point, I had a meeting with the disability unit at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. They donated an assistive device for me that allowed me to project lectures. So as wherever I can sit, wherever in class, and be able to project whatever is, and be able to zoom the work that is being projected in the lecture halls. And so I don't have to now strain my eyes in terms of being able to see what is projected in the lecture halls. That really assisted me a lot. But also remember, this is now happening about 3-4 years into the program, where I did not have access or knowledge of all of those of that kind of assistive device or support that can be offered to me. And even the institution as well, they didn't have that kind of knowledge because of how this kind of information is not readily available, or those kind of devices are not readily available for us to have access to, especially because medical school is a small campus without a disability unit office even. So I relied mostly on the disability unit office that is at Howard College, working with Neville that side to sort of come down to medical school campus to help me. It really affected me a lot because there was a time where I was really performing really badly in my academics, and not to say that it directly is related to my disability or my lack thereof, but it also played a huge role in terms of how I would be performing in my academics, in theory versus practicals, because now the practicals, I have a problem with being able to see the small nerves, the small arteries and vessels. And that's when the academic concession was then introduced into making sure that I get extra time, and which then also initially was a challenge, because also it also goes back again to the misinformation and not having the knowledge and understanding as an institution as well, that how can we better now make the life of this student specifically with special needs be catered for, and also be able to perform optimally. Because remember, when someone is underperforming or not doing well academically, we don't first jump to, oh, what could be the problem? Is it that they're not learning well? It really firstly comes off as they're not studying enough, or they're not doing enough work. But really, mostly for most parts for me, it was really a case of I was not able to see things the way, especially in practicals. But with academic concession, the disability unit brought it on, and we signed academic concession working together with the student support services to ensure that I am now able to get enough time to write my exams, to do my practical exams. And that really helped me a lot, because I could see, or I saw myself performing much better in terms of my academics. It also helped me a lot in terms of boosting my self-confidence, because remember, as a student, the core purpose of coming to varsity is to learn and acquire a qualification at the end of the day. So when that is not happening, your self-confidence is really beaten down. It affects a lot of things and how I interacted with others, because how I had looked at myself now, I felt like, oh, I was a failure, or I felt like, oh, I wasn't doing enough, while all I needed, or what I really needed, was really a good systemic support from the institution that would allow me to perform much better. This included them getting me a computer that had some functions, and all the other apps that were able to assist me to be able to learn better. I was able to, because also printing out material could, like, sometimes it really costs a lot of money, and our learning material was a lot. The assistive device that I had that was able to project, to zoom in the lecture halls, it was able to zoom in textbooks as well, which is the Prodigy. It really assisted me a lot. I am very, very grateful for that, because it really helped me in terms of, because we use textbooks that are they have a really small font, 1, 2, the material is very shiny. So it really used to strain my eyes a lot to be using those kind of textbooks, but I still need to use those textbooks to actually acquire the knowledge. So those are the type of things that really helped me a lot. But now, this is where the issue is, or this is where the core of this talk is. It comes down to the fact that because I had the support that I received in medical school, I was able to, get through medical school and pass and obtain my qualification. Now there is an issue of, there's a girl that is in the different roles of KZN or Eastern Cape, wherever, that really wants to get to where I am now, or want to get to the point where they are able to acquire get into the institution of higher learning and be able to study and be able to and not go through the same difficulties that I had to go through. How do we then make sure that they have the knowledge, they have the understanding, the reassurance that this is what we can do for you, or this is what the university offers? And that's where it comes in terms of when career expos are being done, it is really important to also to have this knowledge be told out to the people in peripheral communities that, hey, we encourage people with disabilities to come, to apply, to get into our institution. We welcome them. Using social media platforms. UKZN has a huge following for their graduation and all of these things and their trend and all of that. How about we make it a point that institutions, they use those kind of platforms to advocate, one, two, to spread the knowledge that, you know what, as an institution, we accept, we encourage people with albinism or with disabilities to come and apply and be a part of our institution. And these are the things that we offer to them. And so that when the person is applying, when the person is coming into the institution, they have a broader understanding and that assurance that, you know what, I'm going to this institution and I know that my needs are going to be catered for and accommodated. Just like how it could be, it is in some workplaces, especially in corporate, by the time they know that they have accepted someone with a disability, they know they already have put measures in place for that person to be able to be comfortable enough at work. It's the same thing. It's the same concept. It's really sad to see that people with so much potential, people living with people with albinism with so much potential, they're smart, they have the knowledge, but they don't have access to acquire education at tertiary level because of the fears, because of the stigmas, and also because of how the uncertainty that surrounds being in institution of higher learning. I met a guy, he works at Albert. He asked me, how did you get into medical school? I was like, I applied. And then he was like, no, we were told that people with albinism are not allowed to get into medicine. They can't do medicine. I was like, who told you that? And this is the kind of information that these misconceptions and misinformations that we should be working tirelessly to make sure that this is broken down, and we are really, 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 destigmatizing and really making sure that people have the correct knowledge, they have access, and they know that UKZN as an institution, they encourage people to actually apply and come into the high institution of learning and be able to acquire. And it would be so great. It would be so great because we don't see a lot of people with albinism, penetrating in those spaces, especially in the healthcare sector. And so it's really one of those things that I wish for, that even in this webinar, it's something that we consider and something that we take, into account, that as an institution, what are we doing, or what is the institution doing to ensure that, we are bringing people and encouraging them to come and say, hey, come and apply and come into our institution. Apart from the fact that now that they're here, what are we doing? But are we also going out there and encouraging them to actually come and apply into our institution and putting correct measures in place to ensure that they are really accommodated and catered for without having to put on a fight or having to, strain themselves in terms of, hey, this is what you should do for me. This is what I need. This is, and because also that can be very emotionally and psychologically taxing. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Bashle. for providing us with such rich and deep insights into your sharing your personal lived experiences with our audience. And I just picked up on a few points which I would like to mention and which I found very interesting. When you mentioned your visual disability, nystagmus, but also just to mention that, yes, albinism results in poor vision. Aside from nystagmus, there's also other conditions related to photophobia, poor depth perception, strabismus, poor visual acuity, and refractive errors. So, there is a wide range of visual challenges. And you even quite vociferously brought up the issue of how albinism becomes a complex issue, and that when you say that, yes, some persons with albinism regard albinism as a disability, but on the contrary, there are other people who do not regard albinism as a disability. And this is what is also highlighted in literature. And funny enough, Dr. Subia and I, we've had discussions on this, about albinism, a disability, albinism, not a disability. But however, many scholars have argued for the fact that it is a disability. There's poor vision, and which requires disability support services. And also, it's been very encouraging to note what our disability unit at medical school, you mentioned Mr. Neville Balakrishna, what our disability unit provided in terms of academic concessions. I mean, with what they've done and the way you spoke so positively about it, it is clear that these reasonable accommodations supported you and enabled you to be retained in the academic program. So that's very great to hear. And also some of the reasonable accommodations that you mentioned, like large print, digital accessibility. And it's exactly what Dr. Subia spoke about. The absence of this digital accessibility, what it does, and it further marginalizes persons with albinism, and it doesn't even align itself to the Sustainable Development Goals. And here you are providing your lived experience of how these different assistive technologies brought you into the mainstream of academia to ensure that you can successfully graduate. But more importantly, I think this is something I'm very passionate about as well, it's about disability in the spaces of practical placements. Because we do understand and we do know that these practical placements, they actually form part of the core curriculum. And it was really heartwarming to hear, the measures that you have put in place to ensure that you navigate your practical placement with the resilience and with success. And I also like the part, aside from the structural barriers with regard to stigma, inaccessibility, you were very vocal about the psychosocial challenges, like fear, low self-esteem, rejection, and very low self-confidence, which in itself is so damaging to a person's personhood. It's so damaging to a person's human development. But thank you for what you had to say. And, we really admire your resilience in navigating your life and your academic program, and also instilling yourself and how you fit into the program. How would you use digital accessibility tools and how you made it work for yourself. So therefore, I use the word resilience because it is clear that, you know, you are a very resilient woman. And you left us with a very beautiful message of what institutions can do for especially persons with albinism in deep rural areas. What can we do to ensure that these persons are not left behind and that they too have a space in terms of accessing applications to higher education institutions, and that we must go out into the rural areas and speak to people about what higher education has to offer to persons with albinism. So thank you so much for that. I know that we have a third panelist, but we do know that she's experiencing connectivity challenges. And, you know, we tried very hard to actually get her on track, but I think she's still having challenges. And perhaps, you know, at another time, she will be able to present on her experiences. But what I do know is that she was going to present on the experiences of women with an albinism condition. I know that she's the expert on this, not me, but I do know in preparation for our academic paper, we, both Dr. Subia and I, did come across some of the unique experiences that women with the albinism condition have to negotiate and navigate in their lives. You know, especially from the perspective of community stigma, family stigma, and not gaining access to employment and education. But really, I'm not the authority on that. But what I do want to mention is that what research indicates on the impact of mothers of children with an albinism condition. And your research actually highlights that in many African countries, there is an alarming number of persons living with an albinism condition who live with their single mothers. And the issue of singleness of these mothers is actually largely attributed to denial of paternity by biological fathers, where they don't want to acknowledge that the child with an albinism condition is the child. So these single moms are left alone to actually provide care and nourishment for these children. And these women actually experience multiple discriminations. First, in terms of the fact that they are single mothers, they are labeled, they are stereotyped, they are stigmatized. Furthermore, that you are a mom that has given birth to a child with an albinism condition. The albinism condition is actually, it's in community spaces becomes a marker for difference. And once there is difference, that alone is enough for the production and the reproduction of stigma. So as you can see, it's not only the child with the albinism condition that is stigmatized, but also the mother is exposed to multidimensional stigma, labeling, and negative stereotypes. Right? So sometimes, and again, I'm speaking from the perspective of academic literature, where, you know, many of the children with an albinism condition, they are raised without support of both parents. because parents feel disgraced. They fear rejection. They fear stigma from the community. So these children are abandoned into the care of their grandmothers in very, very rural areas. And the fact that the child is left without the parent creates even more financial burdens on perhaps the grannies. And that is one of the reasons why there is the issue of the inability to afford proper health care and education for the child. Many instances, again, coming back to the mothers, they are blamed for the child's condition. They are accused of infidelity with white people, or they are accused as carriers of evil or demonic spirits. Even further, there is a piece of research that really caught my attention, and this was research undertaken in Zimbabwe, where a 9-year-old girl child with an albinism condition was persecuted by her teacher who was pregnant, because the teacher believed that this child must be placed as far as possible at the back of the class, and because the teacher was so scared that her unborn baby would be born with an albinism condition. But also what happened, this child fell behind in her schoolwork because she was kept as far as away from the teacher as possible. She could not see the blackboard. She fell behind in her lessons, and as a result, she failed. So, persons with albinism condition, what we must agree on, and I think from the two presentations, is that they are exposed to multiple systems of abuse. That is, violations from community members, peers, educators, maternal aunts, their siblings, and even their biological parents. So, in saying that, I think I now want to open the floor to take on any questions, and to see how well we can respond to those questions before we move on to recommendation and bring this webinar to its conclusion. I did see here Mr. Cizo Kabela as a guest on this webinar, and I'm wondering whether he can share a little bit about his experiences with us, but failing which, would there be any questions for further discussions? Okay, so I'm sure if anybody had any important or critical issues to take forward, I'm sure that it will come through. So what I did pick up a few recommendations from this webinar, and I hope that all of us in our own little spaces can take something back home. So from these recommendations, um, we did gather awareness, education, training, advocacy is a powerful tool in our efforts to reduce the challenges experienced by persons with an albinism condition. And it is also safe to say that the United Nations has actually declared or acknowledged uh, um, advocacy as a powerful tool to reduce systemic discrimination, marginalization, and oppression. So it's something that we need to think about. And furthermore, in terms of advocacy, how we should gather recent data and how recent data must inform our advocacy initiatives. Coming back to the presentations, Dr. Ashley Subia, he mentioned the various policy frameworks, but we can still see how many gaps and complexities are still in the policy frameworks. And perhaps there needs to be a redress on equity measures, and more specifically, acknowledging the unique experiences that persons with albinism endure. And this policy redress must bring together with it the notion of human rights violations in terms of harmful cultural practices. So therefore, policy redress is very, very important. And we need to develop a national digital framework. So once we do that, it actually improves digital accessibility for persons with visual disabilities. And what came out from both the presentations is the need for massive, large-scale and expanded capacity building and training. And as Dr. Ashley put it, more especially so on assistive devices that remain available for persons with low vision. And even, he went on to mention as well the issue of developing infrastructures to address and redress digital technology in rural areas, because in this way, digital technology must be made accessible to all so that we ensure our accountability to the sustainable development goals, that no one shall be left behind. More importantly, reasonable accommodations. As we all know, and the United Nations has declared that reasonable accommodation remain as the entry point to enhance human rights and social justice for persons with disabilities. So we need to become more aware of the reasonable accommodations that need to be put in place. And as Dr. Bashler mentioned, reasonable accommodations, for example, large print, front row seating, and assistive technology. And that furthermore, because albinism is a very painful and complex construct, it is a construct that is always associated with stigma and with bullying. So perhaps in higher education, or everywhere else, we have to dedicate safe spaces where persons with albinism can come together and freely speak about their lived experiences as persons living with an albinism condition. Safe space work is very important. And if I may just add, a powerful theoretical construct that we use here in the disability unit in terms of safe space work is that promotes student development is the theoretical construct as proposed by Professor Vincent Tinto on student development, retention, and success. And my colleagues will know about it, which is related to learning communities and how this promotes expansion for students with disabilities in spaces of higher education. And lastly, the issue of psychosocial support. As we do know that persons with the albinism condition, they actually endure very deep-seated psychosocial challenges, and that even in our community spaces, especially in deep rural areas, we need to take not only the issue of recruiting persons with albinisms to higher education, but also to tell the communities about or conscientize them about issues relevant to albinism, about stigma associated with the albinism conditions. There were lots of other recommendations, but because of limited time, I also want to go back to our, our participants. You know, I want them to give us one take-home message, one priority area for us to think about and to consider when we're engaging with persons with an albinism condition. Dr. Subia, may I go to you first? So for you to provide your final thoughts about fulfilling a fundamental human right and destigmatizing um, issues relevant to albinism. To you, Dr. Subia.
Thank you. You've said a lot. I think that's very relevant. But yeah, for my final thoughts, I think for me, albinism is not a condition to be pitied. It actually makes up the fabric of the rich diversity of our society. And it's unfortunate that stigma and exclusion limits the lives of persons with albinism. And real change will only take place when awareness changes into action and inclusion becomes part of everyday life, not just a policy. So one key priority, and if I could see one thing happen, it would be a national awareness drive led by persons with albinism, shaping their own stories, influencing decisions, and challenging the myths that still surround albinism. Because true inclusion begins when those affected are not spoken for, but are heard, seen, and are the ones leading the change. And I think a session like today, hearing from my co-presenter, was actually very, very powerful because the lived experience really hits home. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Subia. Dr. Bashle, a take-home message. What would you think is a key priority for communities, higher education to take home? Let our practice be informed by the voices of students with the albinism condition.
Thank you. I think a lot has been said, but just to reiterate that I think that the most important thing to really take home is that people living with albinism are a part of society. They really, well, I personally always want to form a part of community and be a part of something great. And I think if there is more exposure, there's more opportunities, there's more inclusion and accommodation, that we wouldn't be having so many endless conversations. Because I mean, we have conversations about albinism where there's albinism awareness month, there's albinism awareness this and that, but really there isn't much changes that we can, like practically see happening in terms of how people with albinism are accommodated and catered for, and also just included in community. But more so, they just really, most of the time put in the sidelines. So I think it's really important to kind of create spaces, like I said, in institutions, create spaces in communities where they can feel they are a part of something greater than just existing or living in fear and, and all these stigmas surrounding them. I think the liberation of people living with albinism is really important, because once someone is liberated, they can be able to be themselves without having the fear of being perceived a certain way or seen a certain way. And I think for me, that is really, really important, and something that I really, live for and advocate for, to be liberated, to be free. And I think that is really, really important. We still have a long way to go, but I'm really grateful that we are having these conversations and we are really, working towards, getting somewhere in terms of achieving that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Bashle. And I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for your attendance in this webinar. I started with the mention of policy frameworks, and I'm going to end with it. And, it's clear we still have a lot to redress and include in our policy frameworks to make it truly, truly inclusive. It's an important milestone for us to achieve. It's an important milestone to the achievement of health equity, social equity, and climate justice. And lastly, on the notion of climate justice is a human rights issue. As we know that persons with the albinism condition require adequate sun protection and appropriate treatment to prevent, precancerous lesions. With regard to that, the World Health Organization has added sunscreen to its essential list of medicines. And this is indeed a victory, a celebration in the name of health equity, social equity, human rights, and social justice, right? And this in itself is enabler to end the production and the reproduction of stigma associated with skin cancer. So this is sunscreens, okay? And this very sunscreen is actually central to the rights of persons living with an albinism condition. The lack of provision of that predisposes them to cancer, and it also equates to systemic and multidimensional oppression, abuse, discrimination, and marginalization. With that being said, I want to bring this webinar to a close. We are 1 minute over. Once again, thank you all for attending.